Chapter 3. Differentiation. To think how a body of truth or subjectivizable body differs from an ordinary body, and accordingly how a truth's appearing differs from the appearing as an object of a world of any ordinary multiplicity, it is necessary to firmly grasp the protocols of differentiation that make up the logical identity of this world. Since appearing is the capture of multiples ontologically defined on the basis of the void by a network of differences and identities, it must be possible to define an intramundane singularity, such as a truth process, in terms of purely logical criteria internal to the formal system which regulates differences, or, more generally, relations between multiplicities. In order to arrive at this definition, controlling what it means that truths exist, let us attempt to represent the situation of a world. As given in their pure being, the multiplicities that coexist in this world can be drawn as circles of various sizes. The notion of size is very approximate here, because any two multiplicities differ as soon as an element possessed by one of them is not an element of the other. As such, two multiplicities can very well be ontologically different, even though they have the same size, that is, the same number of elements. All it takes is for the multiplicities to differ on one point alone, as when they have the same elements, except that alpha belongs to one and not the other, while the latter possesses beta, which is not in the first. That alpha is different from beta suffices in itself for the two multiplicities to be absolutely different. This local, or in other terms, extensional dimension of difference makes it impossible to account for the difference between two multiples in sheer quantitative terms. That said, let us suppose that different circles represent different multiplicities, by which I mean ontologically different ones. This is a crucial and delicate point. Ontological difference does not necessarily coincide with difference in appearing. This is why a plane tree by the side of a road undoubtedly differs from the one next to it, yet to the eyes of a traveler in a hurry, all the trees blur into one monotonous series, where everything is the same. The trees appear to be overwhelmingly similar, even though they are absolutely different. Within the register of appearing, they repeat the same pattern, whereas their multiple being repeats nothing at all, since any difference, even that attested to at a single point, is ontologically absolute. Were we to scale the world, on the contrary, to the field of vision of an individual reclining in a meadow between two plane trees, and focused on the fine lacework of the leaves against the blue sky, or the twisting of the upper branches, it is clear that the two plane trees would appear as what they are, essentially different. As a result, it is just as possible for that which holds for being qua being to equally hold for being there, as it is for the evaluation of differences in appearing to have nothing to do with the evaluation governing the basis in being of this appearing. The relation between being and appearing, or existing, is contingent. Genuine Platonism has never affirmed anything else, but this can in no way be taken to mean, as the attacks on vulgar Platonism assume, that appearing is of the order of falsehood or illusion. The difference between being and appearing is much rather that which distinguishes mathematics as ontology from logic as phenomenology. Each of these two disciplines being just as formalized and rigorous as the other. Let us carry on, however, with our exegesis of Schema 1. We will represent the logical frame of the world by a plane beneath the circles. This frame contains special elements that we will name degrees. Given two elements of a multiplicity, represented by 2 points in a circle, there is a degree in the plane that corresponds to them. This degree is that of the identity of the 2 points. For instance, let us suppose that one of the circles is the multiple of plane trees by the roadside. Corresponding to two of the trees in the monotonous series imposed upon these by the road, there is a degree of identity. Let's say degree P. Insofar as they appear in the world, these two trees can then be said to be identical to the degree P. We have seen that this degree can be very high if the world and its logic is that of the weary motorist, who by dint of seeing the trees file past, confounds one with the other. The trees all merge together as plane trees and more plane trees. As a result, the trees are strongly identical, even if, ontologically, they are absolutely different. An absolute ontological difference can appear in the logic of the world under the form of a quasi-identity. For the daydreamer reclining between two trees, scrutinizing their shapes and shades, the two trees are, on the contrary, clearly very different, such that the degree P of their identity is very weak. In this instance, the ontological difference appears under the form of a weak degree of identity, and is, as a result, more in harmony with the underlying structure of being. We are beginning to see that the degrees of identity that inscribe, as they alone do, multiplicities within the fabric of relations comprising a world obey specific rules. For example, a principle of comparison between certain degrees must be able to exist for us to be able to say that two multiplicities that appear in a world, and whose identity is measured by a degree, are very identical, or on the contrary, very different. For this amounts to saying, in fact, that the degree P measuring the identity of the first two multiples is clearly larger than the degree that measures the identity of the last two. So it is with the two plane trees caught in the headlights of the motorist in a hurry, and those observed in minute detail by the daydreamer in the valley. If the first two are identical to the degree P, and the other two to the degree Q, we have just explained that it must be possible to state that P is clearly greater than Q. The conclusion being that the structure of degrees is essentially an order structure. It is also clear that the reason two multiples appear to be completely different is because their degree of identity in the world concerned is practically nil. For this to have any sense, however, there obviously has to exist a degree which marks this nullity, and hence a degree smaller than all the others, which lays down a minimal identity of two multiples. With this implying, relative to the logic of the world concerned, an absolute difference, as is the case with the two trees under which lies our half-asleep dreamer. Inversely, if two multiples appear to be completely identical, even though ontologically different, then their degree of identity is maximal, or larger than all the others. This requires such a degree to exist. In short, the order structure of degrees admits a maximum and a minimum. A careful examination of the logical conditions of appearing, or being there, shows that degrees of identity obey two further rules, which I won't go into here, but which are amply demonstrated, analyzed, and exemplified in books 2 and 3 of Logics of Worlds. They deal, respectively, with the existence of the conjunction of two degrees, and the existence of the envelope of an infinite set of degrees. It follows from these rules that the space of degrees constitutive of the logic of a world as the general structure of a Heiting algebra, aptly named a locale. This name is apt because it is, indeed, a matter of the localization of the multiples of which every being is composed, the there of being. There exist many structures of this type that are not isomorphic. This diverse group is caught up in a tension between algebra and topology, between the theory of operations and that of localizations, which I have long believed to be at the core of all dialectical thought. Let's say that this takes the following from here. The structure of degrees of identity that governs appearing can either belong to the classic category of Boolean algebras, or be much more clearly akin to the open sets of a topological space. In the first case, appearing obeys via the measurement of degrees of identity ordinary logic with the law of excluded middle, as is also the case of being as such, which, as we know since Parmenides, does not tolerate a third term between being and non-being. In the second case, an intuitionist logic without excluded middle generally proves to be that which constrains being there to depart from the laws of pure being. Beyond the fascinating details of the logic, or rather the logics, of appearing, what matters to us here is that its seeming infinite complexity is exhausted by the simple means of laws governing identities and differences. Order, maximum and minimum, conjunction and envelope are all that is needed for the difference between being and being there to be thought. I've proposed that the system of these rules be called transcendental. In Schema 1, the cross-section, where all the local differences are indexed to a degree of identity, represents the transcendental of the world. As with Kant's insight, taken up by Husserl, the transcendental is essentially a logical theme. The error, however, was to oppose transcendental logic to formal logic, for the logic of worlds is extracted from start to finish from certain inflections of formal logic. Heidegger famously aligned the destiny of metaphysics with a miscomprehension of ontological difference, thought as the difference between being and beings. If we interpret beings as the there of being, or as the mundane localization of a pure multiple, or again as the appearing of multiple being, which is entirely possible, then that which is in question in what Heidegger calls ontological difference can be said to be the immanent gap between mathematics and logic. It would be proper, then, in order to continue to follow him, to call metaphysical any orientation of thought confusing mathematics and logic under the same idea. Now, there are two ways of perpetrating this confusion. Either one reduces mathematics to a simple logical theory, which is what Frege, Russell, and Wittgenstein all do in their own manner, or one considers logic to be but a specialized branch of mathematics, as many modern positivists do. As such, two metaphysics can be said to exist. The first, dissolving being within appearing. The second, denying that appearing is distinct from being. It is easy to recognize empiricism's variance in the first, dogmatism's variance in the second. Philosophy only exists on condition that it stands firm on the dual consistency of being and being there, the dual rationality of being qua being and appearing, and the intrinsic value and separation of mathematics and logic. On its two borders, moralizing empiricism and dogmatic theology, there has always been the stirring of aggressive phantoms. Here I am making the manifesto of contemporary methods for their exorcism.